Good evening. I'm Virginia Madsen, Director of the Centre for Media History, based in the Faculty of Arts, Macquarie University, and tonight I'm your Master, or as I said last year, Mistress of Ceremonies. I'd like to begin our proceedings tonight, and this is the 5th Brian Johns lecture, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I also pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands now occupied by Macquarie University, the Watamatagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime. I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Darug and Gadigal, and extend that respect to other Indigenous guests present here today. I also welcome previous Brian Johns speakers, and we're very honoured to have Amanda Wilson with us in the audience tonight. She was the 2017 Brian Johns lecturer. We're also delighted to welcome members of Brian Johns' family, and I'm looking at them right now, down in the front, Sarah and Daphne Johns, and Bridget and Simon Patfield. I'd also like to welcome the inaugural director, Bridget Griffin-Foley of the Centre for Media History, who started this wonderful series. And Bridget's just over there in the beautiful green. I'd also like to thank other members of our centre, of the board, and all of our supporters for helping with this event this year. And special thanks to Nicola Evans and Adam Suckling, you'll hear from Adam later, from the Copyright Agency, who've, of course, once again generously supported this event. As you're aware, this event is presented by the Centre for Media History, which is a Macquarie University Faculty of Arts Research Centre, and Australia's only centre dedicated to conducting and fostering research on the history of the media in all its emanations and forms. We work frequently with industry, as with scholars, and often these are interdisciplinary, and we work with media creators of all kinds to investigate, interpret, and explore the history and impacts of our rapidly changing communications and media landscape. The Centre has over 40 full and associate members at Macquarie, in addition to honorary members, which connect us to the larger networks of media history, to media creators and scholars around the world who are working with this thing, media. It's becoming harder and harder to pin it down and identify it anymore, and its histories. Tonight's lecture, as I said, is also supported by the Copyright Agency Cultural Fund. The Copyright Agency contributes an amazing service to Australian authors, writers and artists of all kinds, not only by assisting us to fund a very special event like this, but through its cultural fund. The Copyright Agency supports Australia's writers, artists, publishers and arts organisations in so many ways, including connecting users and creators of content and providing licences for the use of copyright materials such as texts and images. And we'll hear a little more on the great work of this organisation from the CEO, Adam Suckling, who'll say a few concluding words after the lecture and the Q&A. And before we all relax, so don't go away at the end of this, and share our ideas over drinks and food. So please stay with us after that for these refreshments. I'd now like to introduce you to a highly distinguished member of Macquarie's Faculty of Arts, also based in my department. The department is a very long name, Media, Music, Communications and Cultural Studies. Professor of Media, author and journalist, Catherine Lumby. And Catherine's going to tell us a little bit about the man we honour through these lectures, and also introduce you to our keynote speaker, Katrina Sedgwick. So a hand to Catherine to start. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. Thanks, and welcome everybody. And yes, it's a great pleasure to be welcoming the wonderful Katrina Sedgwick. Thanks, Virginia, for organising this event on behalf of the Centre for Media History, and thank you for the wonderful cooperation of Macquarie University's events team and organiser Jack Halliday and the Centre's Dr. Satya Tak. And let me also acknowledge the wonderful Professor Bridget Griffin-Foley. We wouldn't have a Centre for Media History without her amazing efforts and her scholarship. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the Copyright Agency for their generous support of this event and for 3 more years of funding recently awarded through the agency's Cultural Funds grants. Now, these funds are very important, particularly in this time where, as all of us know, grants for cultural institutions and public ideas are really on the wane. And these funds have enabled an exciting and distinguished lineup of media sector and creative industry leaders to present their ideas and their reflections on the past, but also the present and future state of media and culture in Australia. The inaugural lecture in 2015 was given by Mark Scott, who is the former managing director of the ABC, and lectures have also been given by Professor Julianne Schultz in 2016, who was the editor of the Griffith Review and chair of the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. Also by Amanda Wilson. I'm thrilled Amanda's here, the first woman appointed editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. Gee, that didn't take long. And she gave a wonderful lecture. And of course, last year by eminent book and journal publisher Maury Schwartz. And I think many of you are aware of the publications Maury has funded, Where We Would Be Without Them, the Saturday Paper, the Monthly, the Quarterly Journal, and of course Black Ink Press. Now, all of these lectures, I've been to all of them and they were fabulous, have been provocative and memorable, tackling some of the key moments in our country's media from a historical perspective, but equally looking towards the future. Which again, talking about Bridget Griffin-Foley, I think it's something that Bridget's always been enabling with in scholarly and public debate terms, thinking about how does the past bear on the present and the future. And these are really important questions. The term media history is an interesting one, and perhaps one which too easily conjures up images of scholars sneezing their way through archival boxes while disgruntled librarians peer down over their glasses to see who has broken the vow of silence. Any of you who have worked in archives will know that feeling. Like all histories, however, media history is not merely a story about the past. It is equally a story of our present and a set of lessons for our future. Now, I have little patience for the term media disruption. It's a popular term. Disruption is in vogue, and I'm not sure when that happened, because I know one thing, that in primary school my teacher, Mr. Gilbert, did not get that memo. Being a disruptive child, as it turned out when my school report was delivered at the end of the year, was not a good thing. Something Mr. Gilbert made crystal clear. He did not like disruptive children. Today, being disruptive has become a kind of a boast. Disruptive entrepreneurs are glowingly associated with those other empty corporate buzzwords: innovative, nimble and adaptive. Now, I'm not suggesting, of course, that we all put our collective heads in a bag, though some days we feel like it, and pretend that new platforms and technologies are a fad. What I am suggesting is that managing our present and our future media landscape well, that is, with a critical and reflective gaze, requires seeing the continuities between history, the now and the future. I'm not going to talk for too long, by the way. I'm about to get to the introductions. Over the past 6 years, I've been privileged to serve on the Council of the National Museum of Australia, our National History Museum. ACMI is a good friend of the NMA and has a representative, Seb Chan, sitting on our Digital Strategy Forum. Like many areas of cultural endeavour, the NMA is confronting a wonderful intellectual challenge. How do you articulate the original museum experience? The museum experience focused on the materiality of the objects, the wonder, the awe, and the inspiration that people gain from engaging with objects, with the opportunities of the online, social and digital era. How do we parse that relationship? That's a question our wonderful speaker, I suspect, has thought very deeply about. Tonight, Katrina Sedgwick will take us into the exciting but challenging worlds now being opened up for artists as well as media producers and their publics, through the affordances of new forms of online and social media. Drawing on her extensive background as a performer and then festival director, Adelaide Film Festival for instance, but also as a leader, ABC Arts, Katrina is going to share with us her thinking and approach as she steers the Australian Centre for the Moving Image into a new phase of rejuvenation and development. And I believe she's got a little bit of cash to do that with, but she might tell us more about that. Before I ask Katrina to deliver her lecture, I'd like to say a few words about Brian Johns, in whose honour this lecture is being given. Brian Johns had a very public career as a journalist, publisher, public administrator, and leader of some of our most important cultural and media institutions. He was a bit of a national treasure, Brian. I think we can all agree. He devoted much of his career to the development of Australia's public cultures. As the founding chair of the Copyright Agency's Cultural Fund Committee, Brian Johns was responsible for the allocation of $16 million to a wide range of cultural and creative projects. He demonstrated his passion for Australian content while running, at different times, I don't know how he found the time, two of our most important cultural and media organisations, the ABC and the SBS. He was also chair of the Australian Broadcasting Authority and served as a board member of the National Gallery of Australia. As publishing director with Penguin Books and in his other roles, Brian was committed to the importance of supporting Australian authors and creators. He made simply a remarkable contribution to the world of ideas and Australian culture across all media, including the then nascent digital media. The efforts of his contribution continue to resonate throughout Australian media and cultural institutions today. Like Brian Johns, Katrina Sedgwick is an optimist. I've followed her career. She is a believer in the talent and visions of our creators, artists, writers and performers. Like Brian, she has great faith in creators and their capacity to navigate new forms of production and distribution. Katrina equally follows Brian's example when it comes to her understanding of our relationship to these new digital creators and their place in the creative economy. As the leader of a very important public institution, she is focused on creating spaces for creators. Like Brian Johns, Katrina has never been afraid of taking risks and supporting bold ideas. Her own background in the arts, including the experimental end of theatre, has taught her this, perhaps. Certainly, she has come a long way from the days when she first appeared as a 9-year-old performer in the Australian film classic The Last Wave, directed by Peter Weir. Bet some of you didn't know that. It is with great pleasure and anticipation that I now invite Katrina Sedgwick to deliver the 2019 Brian Johns lecture, Breaking Down the Silos, Creativity in the Digital Age.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I too would like to acknowledge that we meet here today on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'm just going to flick through a couple of... There I am. Now I'm officially here. So thank you very much for inviting me here. It is such an honour to give the 5th Brian Johns lecture. So, the rapid development and proliferation of new digital technologies this century has transformed our society's traditional ways of being together, of working, of doing business and of learning. Digital media now permeates our lives in ways that were unimaginable a decade ago and has fundamentally changed the way that we produce, distribute and consume media. The tools to make, share, distribute and watch media content now lies in the hands of the many rather than the few. It is true that these new technologies have the capacity to empower individuals and communities and provide opportunities for new voices. But equally, they demand that we rethink how we engage with and use digital media as our user patterns are transformed and our institutions, both traditional and non-traditional, are dramatically disrupted. I know it's a cliche to suggest opportunity is the flip side of challenge, but in my experience, I really do think that it's true. These changes do really provide some wonderful opportunities for transformation, for collaboration, for finding new ways of working and of working together. And the arts and creativity are at the heart of these opportunities. Previous speakers delivering the Brian Johns lecture have focused on traditional media industries and the seismic shifts that they have undergone, or in fact are undergoing right now, as new technologies and competitors have arrived, disrupting established business models and scattering their audiences. These industries have required a complete reinvention to remain economically sustainable and audience-focused. But my interest as the director of a publicly funded cultural institution is how new technologies and media can be harnessed in creative ways across the arts and cultural sectors to break down silos between art forms and between platforms, to remove traditional barriers to access and to foster innovation. The enormous shifts that we're witnessing can empower audiences to self-select the media they want to explore, to curate their own consumption. They want to have, with their power, their expectations are changing. They want to have a two-way conversation, not just to be delivered to. And yet, as the public enjoys its agency through social media and search engines, it's subject to the relentless drive of surveillance capitalism, where public becomes consumer and their data and deployment has incredible revenue attached. Algorithms are simultaneously narrowing the access audiences and consumers get through targeted digital media marketing. So in this frame, how can traditional cultural institutions, museums, festivals, public broadcasters innovate to extend the reach, impact and public value of our missions? How can the arts and media sectors work together to support creative practitioners to foster cross-disciplinary collaboration and, through this, innovation? How can we embed the value of this creative experimentation and R&D more deeply within government policy as our society, industries and economy transforms? And how can we foster critical media literacy across our community to navigate this torrent of media that's invading our lives? We have to change. The digital age is here. How do we manage and take advantage of this shifting landscape? And how do public institutions redefine their missions and their operating spaces in a digital mediascape where we're all imagined as consumers and where the digital public square is actually a non-stop shopping centre? Powerful creative tools are increasingly accessible in our homes, our offices, our schools and in our pockets. We can access almost any piece of information from anywhere at any time. T. Uglo, who is the director of Google Creative Lab, described the digital transformation in learning to me as a shift from knowledge to curiosity. It's a move away from a paradigm in which knowledge used to be locked away in discrete spaces and in books, in which rote learning and remembering swathes of information was vital, to a new way of knowing, where what matters is developing the critical skills to enable us to discover and explore and interpret. As the economy of the developed world turns increasingly away from hard industries and jobs in manufacturing and many service industries vanish, the robots are coming, and in fact they're here. Robots and governments and corporations and policymakers recognise that the so-called soft skills, those that we learn in arts and humanities, intuition, imagination, creativity, communication, will all be vital to drive our future. It was at the end of the 19th century, at the rise of modernism, that the moving image arrived, alongside the commercialisation of the internal combustion engine, sound recording, and the arrival of the telephone. The steam-driven movement of machines in factories and in trains transformed our world and altered how we experience time and movement. As travel and long-distance communication opened up for the masses and working hours shifted and changed, new collaborations were possible, and it was a dawn, just like now, of an incredibly fertile period of innovation and experimentation. Louis Le Prince shot the first known film footage outside his house in Leeds in 1888 on his single-lens camera using a paper roll film. This pioneering achievement is not very well known, unfortunately, as shortly before a scheduled public display, he went missing, boarding a train, never to be seen again. Thomas Edison's kinetoscope was first publicly displayed in 1893. The single-person peephole viewer used a 50-foot loop of 35mm celluloid film and was influenced by the work of several inventors, including Edward Muybridge and Etienne Jules Marais. In 1896, the kinetoscope debuted in Australia, with 25,000 people travelling to Sydney in the first month of its exhibition to see the new moving pictures. On January the 25th, 1896, the Lumiere brothers screened their 50-second short film Arrival of a Train at La Ciotat station at a cafe in Paris to a small audience who were seeing film for the very first time. It was just very simple documentation of a train pulling into a train station towards the camera. The audience cowered, shrieked with fear, ran from their seats, unable to process that the moving image was not real. It was terrifying and it was wondrous, full of power and magic. The cinematographe, Lumiere, could record, develop and project motion pictures, and it even lent its name to the thrilling new art form, cinema. The moving image has been utterly transformative to the way that we tell stories, fictional and factual, and the way that we disseminate news, fictional and factual. The animation of images not only created a new way to express ideas, communicate and create artworks, it enabled their creator to play with time as they manipulated the individual frames. And like photography, film was portable and reproducible, and suddenly distribution could be global and to a mass audience. No one could have anticipated that within 100 years, people everywhere would be consuming and creating a veritable torrent of moving images. For many years, the creation of the moving image, celluloid, was expensive, the purview of the few. It required specialist technology and teams, complex chemical processes, and distribution was highly controlled by the industry that had rapidly built up around it. But as quickly as cinema spread across the globe, new avenues for access were being created, speeding up through the 20th century into a frenzy of innovation in the 21st. The first electronic television picture was created in 1927. Televisions hit the market in the mid-1930s, and now moving images were in our homes. The first TV satellite was launched in 1962, enabling millions to share the same news story at the same time. In 1965, Eastman Kodak released the Super 8 camera and film cartridge, making filmmaking available to the masses. In 1976, VHS and Betamax were launched. In 1977, the first feature film VHS tapes were released so that we could watch films at home instead of at the cinema. Interestingly, the first 3 films released on these pioneering new platforms were The Sound of Music, Patton and MASH, which probably tells us more about popular culture of the 1970s than we need to know. The first consumer video camcorders were released in the 1980s. Blockbuster video arrived in 1985, 1 year after digital video was invented. In 1997, Reed Hastings founded Netflix, partly out of frustration after being fined $40 by Blockbuster for a late return. Boy, did he get his revenge. And this was the same year the first known picture was publicly shared via a mobile phone, and DVDs arrived. In 1999, TiVo launched digital video recording at home. 2002, GoPro arrived. 2003, YouTube arrived. 2007, Apple TV arrived. At ACMI, we recently closed our free permanent exhibition Screen Worlds as part of this major renewal program that we're undertaking. Attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, it opened to the public in 2009. It was Australia's first exhibition that told the global story of the arrival of the moving image from pre-cinema to the present. It was designed, as most exhibitions are, to arrive, to open and stay the same. But a decade on, the final section was called The Digital Era, 1991 to the present day, and there was a glass dome directly under the sign which had an iPhone 3 in it. Now, clearly, quite a lot has changed since then. Over the course of the decade that followed the release of the iPhone 3, the proliferation of smart mobile technology has meant that the majority of the population carry ever more sophisticated tools of creation, consumption and distribution in their pockets. The 4G network has played a key role in enabling this pervasive, radical mediation. And the arrival of 5G networks sometime in 2020 will literally accelerate this process. 5G is predicted to be 100 times faster than NBN. This speed and depth of data transference is going to enable high quality video to be consumed anywhere and at any time. So we are witnessing right now an extraordinary democratisation of the moving image, and it's at once wonderful and terrifying. We can choose what we want to watch, when we want to watch it, wherever we want to see it. Although I have to say my mobile signal in Brunswick East is quite poor. And our data is being harnessed as we do it to exploit, control and monetise our choices. When we think of media, we think of it as the main means of mass communication, broadcasting, publishing and the internet. But anyone who can afford a smartphone has the possibility of both making and distributing video, indeed becoming a broadcaster. And this incredible power is equally available to our children and our parents. It's readily accessible to wannabe pornographers as to would-be feminist filmmakers. It makes media producers of student climate activists, right-wing nationalists, garage bands and wedding guests alike. Now, while high production value content remains both costly and highly valued, cheap and ubiquitous often wins out. Just like the aphorism, the best camera is the one that you have in your pocket. Two of the most popular YouTube toy unboxing channels, where they literally just show hands unboxing a toy, have racked up a combined 38.6 billion views since launching. And citizen journalism, capturing and streaming real moments in real time, can have massive and sometimes terrible ramifications, from Tahrir Square to the recent Christchurch massacre. The revolution is upon us and it is being televised. From the beginning, media makers, artists, journalists, filmmakers and technicians have experimented with these new platforms to tell and share stories and ideas in an utterly new way. It is the creative industries whose innovation has driven these multi-trillion-dollar industries globally. For the arts, the increased accessibility and affordability of moving image technologies is full of potential. As I said, it remains expensive to create moving image content with high production values, but as the digital tools of making and distributing have become more affordable, the silos are starting to break down between disciplines and form. Practitioners in traditional disciplines, music, dance, theatre, opera, visual arts, can expand their canvas to use the moving image within their practice. When I was a performer in the late 80s and early 90s, I worked with a wonderful multidisciplinary theatre company called ACMI. It gave me my passion for fostering cross-disciplinary collaboration that has been a defining part of my career ever since. Russell Garbett, who's here this evening, who was one of the founders of ACMI, created a stunning 8-minute theatre piece in 1989. He projected Super 8 footage onto his face as he simultaneously performed live the speech that he'd captured on camera. So he's performing live the same image that's on his face. It was creepy and weird and strange and magical, with this weird mix of liveness and animation, which at the time was incredibly rare. But what was hard about it was that it was pre-recorded, and the analogue technology at that time allowed no spontaneity or improvisation of the image with the liveness. A couple of years later, the great Canadian theatre maker Robert Lepage came to the Sydney Festival with his groundbreaking production, Needles and Opium. It was a theatre piece that incorporated ingenious analogue theatre tricks, but also lots of digital projection. His technicians sat on stage with him, live cueing the projection, so that the performer was leading the content rather than the other way. And it was a revelation to me back in 1991 that digital tools could be applied to enable the moving images to work so sympathetically, so organically, with live performance. 15 years later, there was so much more possible technologically, and artists have been seizing these opportunities to experiment. And I have two clips I just want to show, which is why I went through the slides. Sorry. This is a clip from a work called Glow by Gideon Obarzanek. He was working with Chunky Move at the time, and he used motion image capture technology so that the dancer triggered moving image projections around them to life with their live movement. This is about a 20-minute piece, and it was absolutely extraordinary and completely connected technology with a live performer. The other clip I want to show you is from Barry Kosky's work that he made with Berlin Komische Opera of the Magic Flute. And he partners here with 1927, who are a theatre company based in the UK, where they have a completely flat backdrop, just a couple of doorways and steps that the performers stand in, and the set is entirely projected around them for the duration of the opera. It's absolutely extraordinary and magical, such kind of clever tricks. It actually reminds you of some of the kind of early tricks that used to be done in the very early days of cinema and theatre. There's just so much creative opportunity and potential for the moving image to be embedded in the performing arts. But despite highly creative applications of moving image into the performing and visual arts, many of our leading artists aren't easily able to move into the worlds of film and television. Despite its history of experimentation and innovation and its highly creative ensemble-based practices, just like the performing arts, film has, in the main, remained separate from the rest of the arts. Film is defined as an industry, and the measures for investment and success are often different to that of the rest of the arts. The funding mechanisms, as they are structured in Australia, ensure that film and TV sit separately from the rest of the arts and often require the agency to prioritise stimulating the industry with quantitative selection criteria, that is, market attachments, economic impact and jobs, sometimes disproportionately over qualitative selection criteria, the calibre of the creative team, the pushing of form, the quality of the idea or script, the cultural importance of the story being told. The Indigenous unit at Screen Australia is a shining example of the benefits and impact a screen agency can have when other selection criteria are applied. Over its 26 years of operations, the Indigenous unit has identified talented individuals and over years invested in developing their filmmaking skills. The alumni of this program are leaders in Australia's film and television industry. Penny Smallacombe, head of Indigenous, said at their 25th anniversary celebration last year, SBS, NITV, the ABC, AFTRS and other Indigenous organisations like Karma have all been on this incredible journey, and together we've gone from a place where we were absent from screens or stories were being told about us to being able to tell our own stories. Our faces are now routinely seen on television. Our languages are heard at the cinema. Our stories are now shared online with people all around the world. Our work is celebrated at international festivals, treasured at home, and has become a cultural and commercial resource for our people. Screen Australia's Indigenous unit shows the value of backing talent over years, investing in their skills development, supporting these practitioners to experiment and take chances, and through this process find extraordinary success artistically and commercially in making groundbreaking film and television. At the biennial Adelaide Film Festival, where I was founding director for a decade, from 2002, we were granted an investment fund by the then Premier Mike Rann. Amazingly, the $1 million we had every 2 years was provided with only a couple of caveats. Projects had to return some kind of economic benefit to South Australia, and the works ideally had to premiere at the Adelaide Film Festival. But our principal selection criteria was the creative potential of the work and how it can speak to an audience in a festival environment. That is, the calibre of the artists involved and the championing of that voice and the quality of the idea, the story, the subject matter, the pushing of form. This was hugely liberating, enabling us to make some bold choices and demonstrated the benefit that film industry investment based principally on qualitative selection criteria could bring. In 2005, our first year for the fund, we were the first investors in Sarah Watt's debut feature film, Look Both Ways. An award-winning animator, she was moving into live action for the first time, taking the ideas she'd explored through her beautiful hand-painted cell animations into a broader, long-form live narrative canvas, with animation intermittently intervening in the action. It was a big risk. A debut feature writer-director who had no history of working with live action at all. But the script was wonderful to read, and the form was truly exciting. They agreed to shoot in Adelaide, and we were in. And the film went on to win the Discovery Award at the Toronto International Film Festival and Best Director for Sarah at the AFIs. And we supported many other first-time filmmakers' films. Warwick Thornton's extraordinary Samson and Delilah, Justin Cazell's Snowtown, Beck Cole's Here I Am. Fictional and factual films, animations, shorts, cross-platform practitioners and visual artists, and we supported some grand experiments, sometimes with real success. The Adelaide Film Festival Investment Fund gave us a truly rare opportunity to apply subsidy to enable practitioners to experiment and take risks. Whilst government funding opportunities are shrinking, it's vital that the agencies are given the backing to establish programs that support experimentation and new forms and models, and that they can consistently back talent over time, diverse talent, and invest longer term in their careers. It works for the Australian Institute for Sport, and it can work in the arts and cultural sectors. When I was programming arts and film festivals, I loved the opportunity to create a moment of critical mass that invites a broad audience in to explore, to be curious, and to try things they might not otherwise see. I sought to deliver a balanced program, that is, one that offers an audience multiple points of entry, programming work that spans the spectrum, from the glossy and broad appeal attracting large audiences to the experimental and the niche, sometimes for only one person at a time. By applying the government subsidy that we had, we enabled access and removed barriers, distance, cost, invitation, to audiences to see a broad range of work and hear from voices across Australia and around the world. We also understood that a mass audience is really a series of smaller audiences and communities who can gain value from this approach. That is, it doesn't have to all appeal to lots of people all the time, just some of the time. And public broadcasting should do the same thing. Through the public broadcasters, audiences can access arts programming and perhaps discover something that might encourage them to go and see new Australian theatre or visit an art gallery, or to engage with the artists who are reflecting our society and our stories back to ourselves, or even inspire them to create something themselves. The importance of this, the removing of barriers to access and engagement in the arts, often seen as only for some kind of undefined elite, through public broadcast, be it radio, TV or online, is perhaps why the ABC Charter particularly states that the broadcaster exists in part to promote the arts. In the 3 years that I was head of arts for ABC Television, one thing I struggled with was the different interpretations the leadership team had around the measures of reach and impact. Quantitative measures, ratings, are important. ABC TV Arts had to ensure, across a balanced program, that some of its investment delivered prime-time, high-rating programs. These were actually the easier commissioning conversations, and we managed to secure some prime-time slots in the schedule and gain significant ratings. It was harder to argue that a program should be commissioned or acquired when it was clear that the ratings would be relatively small. For example, a one-off half hour, or even more challenging, a feature-length documentary that showcased, for example, an artist in their practice. Australian practitioners, some of our leading theatre and dance companies, musicians, visual artists, opera companies, might perform or exhibit for up to a few thousand people live each year. Most Australians will never have had the opportunity or perhaps even the inclination to seek them out and see this work live. I think that it's vital that we showcase the creative process and work of these practitioners, and equally that we support filmmakers who have a passion to creatively tell these practitioners' stories. But that's not all the arts should be doing on the ABC. Channel 4 in the UK has charted a very clear path in its approach to its distinctive and high-impact arts programming. and it deliberately avoids these kinds of arts-themed documentaries, as they state. Channel 4 tries to do the reverse of what most other channels do in this area. We don't make programs about artists. We commission artists to make programs about us. In other words, we ask artists, in the broadest sense, singers, dancers, photographers and so on, to author the films. Alumni from this approach to programming, which was supported by Arts Council England, include visual artist, now internationally acclaimed filmmaker Steve McQueen, and Turner Award-winning ceramicist Grayson Perry, who's now a regular on BBC and Channel 4 screens. An intervention that we began here in Australia in 2007 was The Hive. I was struck when I began working at the Adelaide Film Festival, after so many years of being around the performing arts, how linear the creative development of new work was in film, and how our funding structures embedded that. There are, of course, exceptions to this, but generally the funding's set up so that the writer writes, and then when the script has the market attachments it needs, the director takes over with the producer, who then brings together the rest of the key creative team, the DOP, composer, production and costume designers, editor, and the acting ensemble, and the director then directs to deliver the new work. Whilst the performing arts also has people in these specialist roles, my experience there in the creative development of new work is that the process is more often collaborative, far earlier in the process. The development of a new theatre or dance production, for example, often brings together the key creatives and the ensemble much earlier in the process through creative development periods, flattening the structure and enabling cross-disciplinary collaboration throughout the creation of the work. We thought it might be fruitful to create a space where practitioners from a range of screen and art forms could come together. The Hive Lab was set up at the Adelaide Film Festival with the Australia Council and ABC TV Arts to bring together filmmakers with leading practitioners from across the arts to talk together in a lab environment about their creative processes and to share ideas about the making of new work. It set up new kinds of conversations, new collaborations, and for a number of the participants, it inspired different kinds of projects and working approaches. And out of this, the Hive Production Fund was established, an $800,000 biennial fund with match funding from Adelaide Film Festival, ABC TV Arts, the Australia Council and Screen Australia. This very rare pool of money invited practitioners from right across the arts into the world of film and TV, and a number of important works have been created that never could have been commissioned through the conventional routes. Stephen Page adapted his full-length dance piece Spear with Bangara into a feature film. Rosemary Myers from Windmill Performing Arts adapted her production for young people, Girl Asleep, into a feature film that went on to premiere at the Berlin Film Festival and won many awards. Lynette Walworth's documentary Tender not only saw Lynette win the Kit Denton Award that year, but the start-up community-run funeral business in Port Kembla that she tenderly documented, successfully fundraised and established a now viable business. Over a dozen films have been made, screening on ABC TV and at film festivals here and around the globe to hundreds and thousands of viewers. The innovation here, the really big breakthrough, was that these practitioners, who often are leading their field in Australia, are now able to contemplate film and TV as a medium for their storytelling in the future. The barriers between these silos, theatre and film, dance and television, independent theatre and the ABC, were shown to be at least partly porous. These artists now have filmmaking credits to their name, and it makes them eligible to apply to the state and federal screen agencies. One of the most successful of the Hive projects was a half-hour comedy sci-fi drama created by Back to Back Theatre. Back to Back is led by artistic director Bruce Gladwin, leading an ensemble of hugely talented performers and creators with a perceived disability. Based in Geelong, they are one of Australia's most successful theatre companies, touring and collaborating with festivals and companies all over the globe, most recently with the Sundance Theatre Institute, and I should at this point declare my conflict because I'm on their board. Through Hive, Back to Back have made a half-hour sci-fi comedy drama called Oddlands, devised and performed by the ensemble in collaboration with Bruce, who directed and wrote the script. It was produced by one of Australia's leading film and television production companies, Matchbox Pictures. In any year, Back to Back might perform live to 2,000 to 3,000 people here and overseas. The live-to-air ABC TV broadcast that screened earlier this year attracted 140,000 viewers. And now the company has received funding from Screen Australia to develop the scripts into a 6-part series. This has to be seen as a success on any measure. This is about changing the conversation and empowering this company, whose ensemble members happen to have a disability, to have a voice on our public television screens. And they are, just like they do in theatre, creating distinctive, important, entertaining and engaging television. The ABC can give leading creative practitioners the opportunity to tell their stories on this canvas and to reach a far broader audience than ever possible in the world of theatre. But it takes a different kind of commissioning process, like the Hive, to overcome the usual funding and commissioning barriers. In the ABC's new genre-based structure, there's a great deal of potential to leverage the arts more effectively across the broadcasters' platforms, across radio, television and online. There's also the opportunity to explore commissioning artist-led projects that harness these platforms along with live site-specific elements to create some really impactful artistic works that can be experienced in situ and through broadcast. But this potential is at serious risk. There is currently no dedicated head of arts at the ABC, and the broadcaster needs to employ one fast, and with the support of the state and federal funding agencies, give them the resources to commission bold and engaging arts content on television, radio and online by screen and arts practitioners right across the nation. For the federal agencies which have faced unprecedented cuts in recent years, Screen Australia, the Australia Council, the National Film and Sound Archive, the ABC and SBS, it's vital to remember the value that creative experimentation and innovation can bring to technology. Because after all, technology is simply a tool. It's what you do with the tool. Content is queen. And we must ensure that we are supporting and developing those practitioners who have the talent to shift the dial and really break through to make new discoveries and find new and significant audiences. Lynette Walworth is an Australian artist whose work right across her career has been pushing the boundaries of technology she works with to tell urgent social impact stories. Her most recent work, Awavana, is a virtual reality artwork made at the invitation of and in collaboration with the Yawanawa people of the Amazonian basin, who saw the possibilities that 360-degree video had to tell their story. Lynette wanted to scan the forest and the community in incredible detail, and through her production partners, she was able to take one of the only 3 ultra-high definition LiDAR scanners available in the US at that time with her crew to the Amazon. The LiDAR scanner collects 300,000 points of data per second. Lynette was seeking a way to harness this brand new technology to create footage that was at once completely specific and ethereal at the same time, to match the vision state the Yawanawa was seeking the VR work to express. Lynette returned to the US and through Sundance had a residency at Technicolor's Experience Centre in LA to undertake her post-production. She worked with Technicolor's team to deliver this very complex work and ensure its seamless interactivity. Technicolor saw how Lynette had pushed this new technological tool and has now bought its own LiDAR scanner and is applying it to many other projects. A residency of this kind has not only been hugely beneficial to Lynette, but also for Technicolor. And that's why this 100-year-old company has an Artist in Residence program to see how artists experiment with these tools and then they can apply it commercially. Creativity thrives on experimentation and risk. It's not safe, outcomes are not guaranteed. The cuts to the federal agencies have reduced their capacity to support this experimentation, and it slows down cultural innovation in our nation. There are fewer opportunities for fewer practitioners and barriers are coming up, reducing diversity as choices inevitably become safer and outcomes are judged more and more on their quantitative rather than balanced with qualitative outcomes. As we pivot into the new economy, digital technology is changing our workforce. The robots, or more specifically automation, are coming. but they're coming with us, enabling us to do more, to explore new ideas, to expand our creative horizons. Soft skills, intuition, creativity, innovation, collaboration, problem solving, communication, nuance, lateral and tangential thinking. These are vital skills to learn that robots can't replace. And these buzzwords are central to the creative industries and the arts. They are our DNA. But we need resources to explore and push technology and platforms, to create content in different ways, to build new businesses and audiences through this. We need R&D. When the federal government released its National Innovation and Science Agenda in 2015, it missed a big opportunity. It set a focus on science, research and innovation as long-term drivers of economic prosperity, jobs and growth, and it put $1.1 billion committed over 4 years, which was fantastic. But it was so very frustrating that as a national agenda on innovation was established, vital for our nation, that it neglected to propose a focus on and vitally provide investment into creativity and the creative industries. Artists and the creative industries push form, they take risks, they look at digital tools in different ways, they are entrepreneurial and they are all about content. Consider one of the very successful startup communities in Australia, particularly in Melbourne currently, the games industry. The multi-billion-dollar global games industries are now bigger than the global film and television industries combined. And let's get beyond the cliche that games are only for sweaty boys playing first-person shooters. Video games are as broad-ranging in their form and as creative an industry as film and television, offering content for everybody and anyone. While the industry has major industries with gender diversity on the production side of the equation, as does film and television, the same can't be said for the audience. Around half of all game players are women. The games industry is all about innovation and business. And because the success of a game is not just code, but storytelling, design, sound, music, user experience design, it's not just STEM, it's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the arts. It's STEAM. At ACMI, we're currently running an accelerator program for Creative Victoria in partnership with the State Library. It's for Victorian startups in the creative industries. Right now, we've got 12 companies resident at our co-working space, ACMI X, for a 2-month program which applies tech startup methodologies to creative businesses. This is the 3rd accelerator that we've run of this kind over the past 18 months. It's early days, but investing in these creative industry companies, we want to support them to build sustainable businesses, and there is huge potential. ACMI was established by the Victorian Government in 2002. Despite no federal investment and because of its unique remit, it is the National Museum for Film, Television, Video Games, Digital Culture and Art. But it grew out of the State Film Centre, which had the care of the Victorian State Film Archive, which is a small and quite idiosyncratic collection of over 170,000 objects and media, and it's really wonderful. The digitisation of collections has been a priority for many collecting institutions for 2 decades now. The opportunity to make objects, artworks, artefacts, in museums and galleries available online for audiences to access anywhere at any time reverses the traditional inward-looking culture of collecting institutions and archives and enables the public to share the wonder and knowledge that resides in these often publicly owned collections. I'm really excited by the opportunities the creative use of digital tools can bring to realise a commitment to public and equitable access of audiovisual archives, even with its complex copyright and commercial requirements. As Lord David Putnam said, it's quite simple. We all pay for the upkeep of material in these archives. We should all be able to access them. If we're unable to access most, if not all of the riches locked up in these treasure troves, then it quite naturally begs the question, why are we paying for them to be preserved in the first place? Rick Prelinger is the founder of the Prelinger Archives, and over 20 years he amassed a collection of 60,000 advertising, educational, industrial and amateur films, which were then acquired by the Library of Congress in 2002. Prelinger says that archives are a primary weapon against amnesia. Rick has partnered with the Internet Archive to make over 6,000 films from the Prelinger Archive available online for free viewing, for downloading, and vitally, for reuse. This is an incredible resource for researchers and practitioners, but also for the public. So, for example, say you're a train spotter. You could mine the archive for train clips and save them. You could make audio-visual party tapes of this footage to share with all your train spotting friends. Or you could create a magnificent mashup of train footage to create a music video for your garage band's new single. I should also just highlight the amazing resource that the Internet Archive is. They're supported in the US only by public donations and billionaire Brewster Kahl's largesse. But they have rescued millions of pieces of footage, including international cable TV broadcasts of 9/11 as it happened, home and amateur movies, millions of books, thousands of video games, all of the tweets that celebrities and politicians try to delete. And they also back up most of the internet in the Wayback Machine. It's a really astonishing archive. Removing barriers to be able to access these treasures and to guard against our amnesia, to mine these collections and remake them anew so that they are living and contributing to creativity today seems a magical thing. At ACMI, we're digitising our collection as quickly as possible, with reuse at the forefront of our minds. What if our museums, libraries and archives were properly resourced to increase their digitisation programs? What if the public broadcasters could also release elements of the hidden treasures in their archives, and we could create a portal for our publics to be able to then access for research, play or remaking our memories? Through the internet, we have access to almost any information. The audience is given agency to choose what, when and where they consume content, but also the freedom to roam through ideas, research, to go deeper and discover knowledge and inspiration that previously had to be doled out to them via a curator in a museum or a scheduler in television. The flip side of this, however, is the torrent of stuff that we have to navigate to find the gems and the new ideas that challenge us and our thinking. Within the torrent, increasingly we rely on algorithms to feed us suggestions and recommendations. But these algorithms are based on what they have learnt we already like, and are usually based on the potential for commercial gain. In this model, where is the opportunity for discovery through serendipity, and which can take us beyond limits set by ourselves and these algorithms to the new? This may be why curated events that gather people together are growing in popularity. As the music industry became digitised, music festivals of all sizes and scales have massively increased their audiences. Seeing artists live is brilliant, and so is gathering together as a community. And so is having an expert person shape a program for you to be inspired again by your favourite artists, but also to discover someone or something new. Progressive museums, festivals and galleries the world over are increasing their attendances. At the same time as Google Arts and Culture and the institutions themselves offer digitised versions of the originals to access anywhere, the excitement of having an expert curator shape a narrative and tell a story through an exhibition in a social and safe space with other people has more and more value. And I say progressive because the institutions that are thinking about audience or user experience and leveraging digital and design tools to deliver new ways to experience the arts and culture that they offer are the venues that are bringing in the crowds. And it's not about dumbing down. It's about accepting that audience expectations have changed and we have new opportunities to engage them in different ways. Why come to a contemporary museum like ACMI, where the bulk of the moving image work that we show is designed to be replicated and widely distributed, and it can be consumed via a device in your pocket? Well, we can illuminate the process of creating the moving image to our curious audiences as much as presenting the final work. As a subsidised institution that doesn't compete on commercial terms, we can challenge the dominant narrative in entertaining and illuminating ways. We offer a shared space, enabling our public to gather together to explore ideas and engage with creativity in a safe space that is imbued with trust, fostering social cohesion and enabling connection. We've just closed the museum doors for a year to undertake a $40 million renewal, funded by the Victorian Government and by generous partners and donors. And this investment is going to see our museum transformed into a leading 21st century museum that harnesses the digital tools available to us to tell our stories in new ways, to extend the audience experience alongside the physical experience of the museum visit. In a time of constrained funding, we've successfully argued our case for this investment to our government because of all the opportunities and challenges I've outlined here tonight. Because the moving images, the practitioners, artists and industries, along with the technologies that we champion and celebrate, are central to our lives and to our futures. We need to be media literate to wade through the torrent and participate meaningfully in our democracy. And we need to curate journeys for our audiences that enable them to discover voices and artworks and ideas that sit outside the dominant media and its algorithms. We need to celebrate artists and moving image makers and their innovation and creativity as vital not only for the cultural enrichment of our society, but equally vitally for the enrichment of our future economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. There's so much in your speech that I definitely want to send a copy to some targeted people in our government and in the organisations that you have spoken today about with such enthusiasm and faith in the creators that make much of this work and the impact that they can have, and that we can ill afford to forget about them. Australia with sport only as the rising star is not enough. We need STEM, and we need the arts. We need all of it. We're now going to open to discussion. We're going to have a short Q&A, and then Adam is going to end the night with a few words. So I'm going to move over there with a microphone. We've had some questions already directed to Katrina when you registered, but I welcome questions to Katrina tonight in the time that we've got. So please get yourself ready, have a little bit of a think while I go through a couple of the questions that we've got ready to go with now. And the very first one, Katrina, is a question about this thing called human-centred design. How important is human-centred design in the creation of digital products?
Hugely important. So the example I'll give is at ACMI. Soon after I arrived, we've established an entire department called our Experience Department. It's actually led by Seb Chan, who Catherine mentioned before, who is a leader in the museum field around how you can harness these digital tools to extend the experience. And in terms of that thinking, we've brought that kind of human-centred approach to not only how we engage with our audience using these tools, but how we engage with each other in a workplace. And it's been transformative. Sort of old problems that have been around for 15 years in our organisation with very kind of siloed thinking have been gradually kind of unpicked by having a kind of human-centred approach to digital technology and problem solving and using these tools to open up communication and find really kind of seamless, quite organic and intuitive tools that enable connections in kind of different ways. So we've found it hugely productive internally. And as I say, you know, the kind of journey we're on now, we've been doing a lot of experimentation as we've been developing our exhibitions. For example, in each one we bring new digital tools and we test throughout that kind of process with our audiences and iterate. And it's actually listed in our organisational strategy now that we are encouraging risk and experimentation. Failure is allowed. We expect failure. We've just got to continually try and tweak and change and improve the human experience of the digital experiences that we provide.
Is the person who asked this question, are you in the audience tonight? Do you want to add anything to that or hone in on your human-centred design idea? We don't want to... Okay. Well, we can come back to that if that gives you makes you think a bit more about this idea of human-centred design. The second question that we had asked to Katrina is, how can digital products lead to improved quality of life for consumers of digital content? These are very big questions, Katrina.
That's a very, very big question.
Yes.
I mean, I think what's happening that I find really interesting is this democratisation. The fact that so many kind of stories and ideas are accessible to you. And the challenge then is how do you push back against the algorithm that simultaneously comes with it? So you've got this kind of space that seems like a very kind of organic, open, democratic space that is also being driven by this huge kind of commercial engines. And so it's that kind of tension, I think, is really complex. But if we understand that, the opportunities that there are now to be able to explore ideas and find different voices are immense, and for people to be able to express themselves in these platforms is also hugely exciting. And I think that is transforming certainly our own expectations of the experiences that we have and the power that we have to make change. But it is, in all cases, a double-edged sword. So, yes, the robots are coming, and it's going to just absolutely fundamentally change our work environment. And that is both terrible and wonderful. So, again, it's just these double-edged swords the whole time.
Of course, you are targeting very much our public, what we might call public cultural institutions of all kinds. They are both media and cultural institutions, as you said. And I think what I take from what you've been saying is that those institutions have a very particular remit, that they should not be just driven by marketing and making money, but they should be attending to an idea of the public as opposed to audiences, which we usually associate with marketing, with financial gain, etc. So the public institutions, whether it is the ABC or the SBS, our public libraries, our institutions and museums, should be able to be in that position where they can lead and push the boundaries. And of course, you're saying then that they will take us down a path where we're not just following the algorithms, that we're not just caught in that end game and that trap. And that seems to be a central tension that we have today with digital disruption, and whether our institutions will get that leadership, will be able to have that leadership, and to do so they need funding to do it, as well as great people like you at the helm.
I mean, we're in a remarkable position in Australia. I mean, I've just come back from a couple of weeks overseas in the States and the UK, and it's we're in a really extraordinary position here where, I mean, the funding is tightening up, but we have substantial government funding for our major libraries, museums and galleries that enable us in the main to have free entry, and we have subsidy that we can apply to tell the stories that do sit outside a kind of a commercial algorithm. So it's a very luxurious and important responsibility to have.
And yet, that's true, but if we do some comparisons, I think we will see that our public broadcasters, for example, comparatively are funded much lower funding than what we find with the BBC or with many of the European broadcasters. And this is similar to our other cultural institutions and libraries, where we can say we have a member, the director of the National Film and Sound Archive on the Centre for Media History's board, and he has definitely told us how there are so many terrible decisions that they have to make because they just don't have enough money to do this fast digitisation, let alone to try and also save material that is at risk. For example, celluloid, nitrate and acetate discs and nitrate film that are rapidly under threat. And I think from my discussions with the British Library curators that if we don't do something about that within the next 5 years, we may actually lose all of that material in its original form. So it does seem to me that it is more urgent in Australia, even though, as you're saying, that we do have this lucky situation that we have free libraries and these other things.
Yeah, I mean, digitisation of collections is something that we urgently need to do, and the hard thing is, in a kind of political frame, is digitising a collection sexy? Is it a great announcement for a government? Well, we need to make it a great announcement for a government. We need to shift the dial and talk about it a different way, because what it enables you to do is something quite revolutionary, and it's actually thrilling. So we've got to find a way to argue that through, and I think the cuts to the National Sound and Archive over the last sort of nearly a decade have been terrible, incredibly damaging, and I think Jan is going to, hopefully be able to kind of renew some investment with the government in this term, because it's such an important institution. I would say too, with the ABC, again, the cuts have been absolutely devastating over the last few years, and continue. And I think that I hope that there will be a rethink in this current government term.
Have you been knocking on the door of the new minister at all with your ideas?
No, yet. I have not. My minister's Victorian.
Oh, yes, I'm thinking the federal. Questions from the audience? I'm sure you have them. You've had a little bit of time to think. Can we pass the microphone to someone? Yep, we've got a microphone over there.
Hi,
Please say
Katrina.
who you are as well.
Hi, I'm Richard Harris, and I was in South Australia for a little while there with Katrina as well, so we got up to some trouble together. But I'm actually interested, just following up that question about human-centred design, and look, I've been fascinated by it, and I think it's really great that it's clearly a driver for you as an institution to actually, the kind of fundamental thing, which is not assuming that you are your audience, but actually listening to your audience, seeing how your audience responds, interface and all that stuff. What I'm interested though is the challenge, because this whole question about what is the audience and how do filmmakers or creators actually respond to audience, and the human-centered thing, because it's a challenge to change a whole concept of what is creativity and how are people actually creating works when they're actually kind of seemingly coming from a creative impulse as opposed to an audience impulse, if you like. So it's about telling those, so it's not coming from a kind of philosophy of human-centered, it's actually coming from a very auteurist philosophy, which has been the kind of the history of the way that creators have been encouraged to create things. So I'm just interested in the challenge of actually shifting that, because I can imagine, say, someone like Warwick Thornton, the last thing he's doing is thinking about human-centered design when he's making his film. So I'm just the challenge of actually getting creators to embrace the same sort of concepts without it actually seemingly challenging what the traditional ways that they've thought about their creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a believer in audience testing a kind of core concept, core creative concept. As an artistic practitioner, I think your skill is your creativity and the idea that you want to express. And I think once you start getting into audience testing those things, I think it can dilute and weaken what you're doing. I think where audience testing is really interesting is around experience, which is different to story. I think there's, all sorts of opportunities. So for example, when you're doing an exhibition, thinking about the journey, the physical journey through the space, those sort of digital moments where you're kind of interacting and unpacking story, is that something that's enriching and deepening the experience for the audience in really kind of satisfying ways, that's opening up new doors, as opposed to audience testing the core curatorial concept, which I think is problematic.
For a filmmaker or a creator, do you mean? Yeah, but one of the great things now, though, is that the opportunity now with the internet, for example, is you can proof of concept things. You can actually take things out and you can test it, experiment, fail, try something else differently and work out how that works. So there's actually a new potential for experimentation that perhaps didn't exist before.
Yes, and again, that's true. But I think, you can go out and say to somebody, would you be interested in this kind of a story? Yes, no, maybe. I think the sort of passion of the artist, the kind of pushing of form or, embracing of a particular kind of form or platform or format in order to bring that story to life needs to be fully realised before an audience is going to be able to meaningfully respond to that. So I'm not convinced that at the germ of an idea, the beginning of an idea, that you can kind of audience test. But having said that, I think that iteration, experimentation, audience testing, and experience focus around the physical journey, the interaction, the smoothness, the ease with which you can engage. I mean, an example, we're going to be doing an audience lab when we reopen. And that's based on an idea where practitioners can come in at prototype or beta test stage of their work. So this is particularly relevant for games. And we've worked with about 10 different companies kind of testing this out over the last couple of years. So we had a company come in called Voxel Agents, and they came in at a very early stage of this sort of time-based intuitive app. Really kind of beautiful sort of puzzle game. Only 15 minutes of the game was built at that point, and they came in and set up in our foyer for 2 days and tested with the audience at that prototype sort of beta test stage. And so they had over 600 people play the game over the 2 days. And what was fantastic was, you're going through this journey, and they were able to, the practitioner was able to, the developer was able to talk to the audience and go, did that make sense? Did you get lost? Is it too hard? Are you finding your way? The audience member was able to sort of ask questions about what are the problems that the practitioner's trying to solve as they're developing this game. And that was a really kind of fruitful engagement. They weren't asking about the foundation of the idea, though. What they're asking about is the mechanics of the journey. And I think that's where audience testing and experience has a lot of value.
We have some more questions. Yes, up the back there. And your name, please, and where you're from.
Hi, Katrina. My name is Iqbal. Thank you for that speech. I'm from Macquarie University. I'm just thinking about the political landscape for arts funding and media funding. And, what I hear in your speech, I may be wrong on this, that we want the status quo, but we want more of it. We want more funding, for example. But I'm just thinking whether the election result has proven that there's no stomach for that. So basically, I feel that we are probably facing a future of more cuts rather than less. And so I'm wondering whether in that landscape, whether we should focus now on alternative forms of media, whether we should refocus our attention to activist media, so I think that could perhaps change the conversation somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking for new avenues to start up conversations is always hugely important, and I think that's what's really exciting about this democratisation of media and the access to this technology that we have now that's affordable to everybody, most people. I mean, I think in terms of the status quo, we're not at the status quo. We've come through a series of cuts, so we're well behind the status quo at this point. And I think where there's real kind of opportunities to kind of shift the conversation is to think more broadly about the value that arts and culture brings. And it's not about necessarily an artist having to create a commercial business. It's about understanding and harnessing the creativity that an artist applies to a technological tool, and through that learning things that can then be applied to other areas of government or policy or business. So, I want some of that $1.1 billion of innovation to be going towards the creative industries, because I think there's huge value that our sector can bring to any national agenda that's genuine about shifting the dial. It has to be about creativity, and artists need to be part of that. So I think it's about how we talk to government and how we find a way to sort of intersect with multiple policy and agenda areas across government and argue hard. We've got to get what would be great is to even just get back to the status quo of, say, 5 years ago.
We have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Duke from the Sydney Morning Herald. I was quite interested in your thoughts around algorithms and the way that digital platforms have affected how we consume media. Do you have any thoughts around whether or not those digital platforms should be doing more themselves outside of government to help foster creative arts?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, Google, for example, has, made this really major intervention and investment in Google Arts and Culture, which is wonderful. I mean, they're, involved with museums and galleries and libraries all over the world, digitising artefacts, objects, artworks, and making them available for the people who can't travel to the Louvre, to be able to see these really important things, and they're doing it at very, very high definition, so you can really get in close and kind of examine these works and so on. But the problem is they're businesses, and they're around commercial gain, and that's around how they can use our data to sell us stuff. I mean, in the end, even things like Netflix, you're automatically, the feed that you're getting is the stuff that they know you like. So how can we be curious? I think it's unrealistic to think that those commercial businesses are going to turn around and be altruistic about broadening the voices that we hear. And it's really interesting, as the kind of models are changing. For example, what's happening in cinema is that distribution of kind of independent cinema, for example, in Australia, has absolutely shrunk. The number of films that we're seeing from around the world, particularly foreign language films, are a fraction of what we were getting access to 5-10 years ago. I mean, thank God for film festivals, otherwise we just would never see it. In fact, we're going back to like the 60s. We had to go to a film festival to see a French film. It's going to be like that to see something from, Pakistan or Mali, So I think we have to, as subsidised cultural institutions, really step up and take responsibility of that, and I think we do as a sector. I think that the broadcasters have to really step up and use their subsidy and apply it to allow these different voices, these new voices, to be heard and seen. But I think to rely on the business world to deliver that for us is unrealistic.
Thank you.
We are probably running out of time, but if you can be very quick down the back there. We've got two. Yes, questions rather than long comments now, I think, at this stage, even though they've all been really, really wonderful. Great. And please tell us who you are and where you come from.
I'm Leslie Power. I'm from SBS, and thank you to Margie Borschke for letting me speak, and thank you, Katrina, for a wonderful talk. SBS is a public broadcaster which has invested several millions of dollars in a 3-year project to digitise a selection of its archival content. Have you seen any examples, Katrina, from some of the overseas archives that you spoke about like amazing or exciting ways of bringing those archives to life, sharing access, artist in residence programs? Could you talk a little bit about how once stuff is digitised and preserved, how it might be used?
Well, I mean, I got really inspired in 2005 by the BBC's Creative Archive. So the broadcaster digitised large sections of their sort of non-commercial components of their archive, and made hundreds of hours available for the public to reuse. They did it through Creative Commons licence. It was a little bit rigid in that you were able to make something and then you had to put it back into the system, so it wasn't like it was completely unencumbered and free for you to apply. It only lasted for, I think, 3 years. But it was a kind of a wonderful concept that's sort of I found incredibly inspiring. And then I think the work that's been done through the Prelinger Archive that I mentioned before, he does a lot of speeches around the world. He mines his own collection and does these fantastic presentations, and he enables reuse for anybody at any time. So there's a lot of examples of artists going in there and really being able to mine it and create beautiful new works, but there are not many examples. It still is quite a new concept, and one that I think we should go for.
Can I ask my question now?
Yes, okay.
I've got the mic. So my question is...
Margie Borschke?
Margie Borschke, Macquarie University. My question is, what is the role for public institutions in providing access to private collections, such as the Prelinger Archive, which of course, actually did begin as a commercial archive. I think we should remember that his originally had a stock footage business. So these kind of eccentric collections, they come to have so much importance. So where's that role for the public institution?
Well, partnerships, which are so critical. And, you know, we've been talking to Rick for quite a long time, and obviously the NFSA has, in an ongoing conversation with Rick Prellinger. Yeah, I mean, again, digitisation and doing kind of targeted digitisation programs that we can then share amongst a kind of network of international collections and archives is something that we're striving to achieve. And we're kind of going with the easier ones to begin with. You know, organisations like the BFI, Sound and Vision in Amsterdam, and the Eye. You know, organisation and Prellinger, where there's already a kind of a body of work that enables a fairly quick conversation, and then creating the kind of right back-end system that can facilitate an international collaboration of access to collections for reuse. And reuse is the big thing. You know, I mean, we can view hundreds of hours of stuff, but really who's going to do that? People want to get in there and play.
There's been wonderful things also, like with a lot of silent film, how they've been put on again in public situations with new soundtracks, and significant composers have been brought in, and they've become a great event. I can think of Michael Nyman working with a wonderful film at the beginning of film history, really, The Man with a Movie Camera by Ziga Vertov, and a new soundtrack was given to that. And it went around Europe, I think. We don't have as much of that perhaps in Australia. I'm not sure about Melbourne, but it's not such a big thing. But that's another kind of way of approaching it, of course, and that very much having that physical presence, as you've said in your talk. Look, I know there are more questions, and I've still got one more small one here, but I realise our time is moving on, and we all want to have a drink. We all want to meet each other and discuss out there with all of that wonderful food and drink. So I'm now going to introduce our wonderful supporter, CEO of the Copyright Agency, Adam Suckling, who's going to wrap up our event and say a few words. Thank you very much. Thank you, Katrina.
Gosh, last speaker before drinks. I'll try and keep it short. Perhaps I should toss away the speech. Look, thank you for the introduction, Virginia. We at the Copyright Agency do 4 things to support artists and writers and publishers. We license content for use in schools and businesses and make sure that people's content that is used, the people get paid for it. We run legal cases to protect the rights of artists. We advocate in Canberra on behalf of writers and publishers and artists. And we also, as both Virginia and Catherine said, distribute money through the Cultural Fund that Brian John set up. It did, in his tenure, distribute $16 million. It's distributed much, much more in that time since then. And I acknowledge the Brian John's family here tonight, including Simon Patfield, who I went to school with. So Simon and I catch up once a year. It's always fun. My real job, though, here is not to sell what we do, but is to thank Katrina for a really, really thought-provoking and wonderful speech. What really resonated for me was how clearly you put the moving image and arts generally right in the centre of experimentation and innovation, rather than seeing arts as a kind of input into digital innovation. And if you go to these tech conferences, they talk about all these techie things, and arts is reduced to just sort of bits or units of input. And you didn't do that. You took us through the extraordinary history of the moving image and showed clearly the inextricable linkage between the technical and creative innovation. From the Lumiere's train, and I always loved that image of the people running out of the theatre, to television, to the founder of Netflix, and then all the way through to the ACMI and screen worlds. You showed us that well before business types were talking about multi-platform offerings, that you as a performer in the early 80s and 90s were working with cross-disciplinary collaboration through etc. And I thought it was a fantastic illustration of the way in which you can bring lots of people together to bring a new and unique ways of seeing the world, and you track that through to the Hive. So you don't need no Zuckerberg telling you about innovation. And you told us compellingly, and then you concluded, I think, because you'd put the arts and creativity so central to the whole conversation, it left all of us, I think, it certainly left me feeling really, really positive about things. So often you can come to these talks and people say, really, not this one specifically, but talks generally, there's all this disruption, it's destroying things, and I feel this real sense of kind of elation in the way that you put it, because creativity was genuinely at the centre of all you talked about. I knew Brian a little bit, not as well as people in this room. He was a very good friend of family, and I met him a couple of times at the Copyright Agency. I feel certain he would have enjoyed the speech. I think he would have thought it was a real testament to the ideas that he had. From what I've seen, it seems to me at the heart of everything he did was this idea, a similar concern about how can you use everything within your disposal to enhance creativity. And I think you expressed that and demonstrated that really well in the speech. So, thank you very much for a wonderful speech. I hope they fix the mobile coverage in East Brunswick. Can we give a round of applause? Finally, before drinks, I'd like to thank the Centre for Media History. The work is really, really important, ensuring that all the major changes that we're seeing are thought about and analysed and understood. Thank you, Virginia, to the team. Thank you, Catherine, for the words you said, and thank you all for attending. And now you can have a drink.